There we go. My name is Antonia Harter, and I'm going to be doing this presentation today. This presentation is not about me or any specific person I know. It's an overlook of what it means to be transgender. I've been doing this presentation here at South Texas College. I was informed this morning this is my 11th year of doing this presentation. And I will say this is the smallest group I've had in this auditorium in 11 years. I did my first 3 in classrooms, and then from then on we were here in this facility here. I have not done this presentation since before the COVID outbreak, so I will be a little rusty and maybe even a little nervous. So please forgive me if I am not as smooth as I might be. Transgendered. That's a grammatical error. Who can tell me why or what the grammatical error is? Some English major needs to leap forward and try to tell me what the problem is. Just anybody, take a guess. Please. Beg your pardon? Well, actually it's because we are not transgendered. Nothing's been done to us, nor have we done anything to ourselves. We are transgender persons, not transgendered persons. Transgender, you can see I've got the ED grayed out on this one. Transgender is an umbrella term. It is a huge umbrella term. It does not mean one specific area of being transgender. You might not be taking notes if you don't want to, because there will be a handout. Okay? That's up to each one of you, but there will be a handout. So, there's 2 terms up there that are synonymous with each other, which means that they're 2 terms that mean the same. Can anybody identify what those terms are? You're not going to get an F if you guess wrong. Okay. The 2 terms are transvestite and crossdresser. The old term for most people who crossdressed was transvestite. And it comes from a German researcher done in the 1920s, and that's where that term originated from. And transgender, it means crossdresser or transvestite. It's the same thing. There's no difference between a crossdresser and a transvestite. Most crossdressers do not want to be considered transvestites, because for a long time on the internet, people who advertise themselves for sex work classified themselves as transvestites. That doesn't seem to be as common today, but at one time it would be an insult to tell a crossdresser that they were transvestite. Drag queen, everybody probably knows what a drag queen is. We've seen enough of it on TV with RuPaul and all of that sort of thing. Drag king. Well, drag king is kind of a misnomer, because drag comes from Shakespeare. The liner notes, when handed out to the actors, there would be the term in the margin would say D-R-A-G, and that was a note to the actor that they would be dressed as a girl. So drag means dressed as a girl. Well, if you're a drag king, you're not dressed as a girl, you're dressed as a man. So drag king is kind of a misnomer. It doesn't make a lot of sense if you know the origin of the word. Gender queer, relatively new term. Well, actually, non-binary and gender queer kind of mean the same thing. Gender queer is really the older term, and I have a friend who is gender queer, and he does not like to be considered non-binary because he thinks that's a nebulous term. It doesn't state enough about who he feels he is. So, and Michael, one of my oldest friends, dresses as a man all the time. Well, that's not, he wears skirts a lot, but he has a goatee, and he's bald, and does not wear makeup, but wears a lot of women's clothing, blouses, and tops, but has a lot of jewelry, a lot of heavy jewelry, a lot of ring jewelry, and so forth. And nobody misunderstands that he's a man. Nobody. But he's genderqueer because he's taken what normally is seen as a man and flipping it upside down. And the same thing pretty much with non-binary, but people who are non-binary are more younger people, and, well, Michael's going to be 60 this year, so he's certainly not a younger person. Intersex, we'll come to that later. Cisgender. How many people in this room are cisgender? So the rest of you are gay, right? Cisgender, all it means is you identify with the gender that you were put on your birth certificate. That's all it means. So how many people here are cisgender? Oh, that changed things a lot, didn't it? See, learning what words mean can make you less stupid. Non-binary, we touched on that a little bit. Transsexual. A transsexual is somebody who actually lives their life full-time in the sex that, or the gender that they believe they should be. There's lots of different ways of being transsexual, and we'll go into that. M to F simply means male to female. I am male to female, transgender person. Female to male, some of you probably know some people who are female to male transgender persons. I've met quite a number of them here in the Valley. In fact, one of the students that was here 5 or 6 years ago, maybe less, has completed transition and is living his life as he feels he should. And know him very well. In fact, was about ready to finish a master's work in, I don't remember, but anyway, TG and GG. TG means trans girl. GG means genetic girl. See a lot of genetic girls in this room. That term is not used as much as it used to be. When I first started attending meetings and so forth with transgender persons, one of the questions would come up, if you looked like your presentation and there was no question about whether or not you were male or female, people would ask, are you TG or GG? Living stealth. Well, we'll come to that later too. And that basically means that I've transitioned and I live my life out in the public, and no one, for various reasons, can really say that I'm a man who became a woman or a woman who became a man. And you don't let that information out except with very, very close friends. And if you know that about somebody, it's not your place to out them to anybody else. That's private information that's been given to you as a trust. And it's your obligation to keep that trust. Sexual orientation. Sexual orientation simply means who you're attracted to. You're either attracted to men or women. And some people, if you're bisexual, are attracted to both in varying degrees. Some bisexual people are very attracted to men if they're a man, and somewhat to a woman. Some bisexual men are very attracted to women and kind of attracted to men. It's not a 50-50 mix. People don't live their life in splits. You live your life the way you live your life, and you can't help who you're attracted to. That's not something that you can control. So, sexual orientation has very little to do with being transgender, but we'll cover that. Non-binary. I'm going to let you read that. It'll be in your handout, and then we'll make some comments about it. Okay. People who are non-binary are usually, as I mentioned earlier, younger people. And when they look at pronouns, they want pronouns used they, them, their. In other words, non-gender biased pronouns. So if you know somebody who is non-binary and they're in your life, you do them a favor by honoring those gender pronouns. And as I said, genderqueer, is part of that identity also. Crossdresser and transvestite. Okay, I'll let you read that and we'll go on about that. Okay, transvestite. Now, I had 4 years of Latin when I was in school, so I understand Latin very well, or I used to. And trans in Latin means a cross, and vestia means vestments or clothing. And in the Catholic Church and in the Episcopal Church, the priests wear vestments. These are particular clothing that they wear for particular events, saying Mass, doing funerals, doing weddings, and so forth and so on. Those are the vestments that they wear. And all that means is the clothing, the special clothing. Transvestite simply means a cross clothing. No different than cross-dresser, it's just an older term. Transsexual, I'll let you read that one. Okay, as it says there, pre-op transsexual desires sexual reassignment surgery, which now has been changed to gender reassignment surgery or gender affirming surgery. So gender affirming surgery is probably more correct than sexual reassignment surgery. And I put a lot of these terms in here that are older simply because these are terms you might hear, but today you might hear something different, but they mean the same thing. So gender affirming surgery and sexual reassignment surgery are the same thing. It's just looked at it differently today. We're affirming surgery today with medical intervention affirms or confirms the gender identity that the person sees. So you have pre-op, and as it says, pre-op encompasses a lot of different areas. A person may elect not to have surgery because they can't afford it. Very, very expensive. Just a few years ago, it was $60,000 plus. They may not have a medical history. They have a heart condition or some other condition that prevents them from having gender-affirming surgery. Or they just like their life the way it is, they like their genitals the way they are, and they feel satisfied with their life as it is without doing anything about it. And then there's pre-op or post-op, and that's a person who's had the surgery and is now moving towards full-time expression and living in the new gender that they feel they should be. And non-op, that goes back to the person who can't afford it, ever, medically will never have it, ever, or because of personal feelings about themselves and their gender expression, don't feel the need for surgery, and they would be non-op. So as a person who, for a variety of reasons, does not plan to have SRS or gender-affirming surgery, but nonetheless knows they should be the opposite gender. Transgenderist. This is very similar to the non-op. but it needs to be brought out as a separate identity. Is a person who changes their apparent gender and cross-lives without sexual reassignment or gender-affirming surgery and may or may not feel the need for hormones. A transgenderist does not feel the need to alter their physical sex. And there are a lot of people who live like that, and there's a lot of criticism of that, even within the transgender community. If you're so sure you're a woman, or if you're so sure you're a man, you should have surgery. Well, that doesn't work for everybody. And we should not be judging that for them. Drag queen and drag king. Well, I told you about poor old William Shakespeare. And the term drag comes down from Shakespearean times and plays of the day, dressed as a girl. Now, a drag queen, opposite gender for entertainment purposes only, same thing for a drag king. In the drag queen category, the vast majority of those drag queens happen to be gay men. Not exclusive. There are even women, born women, who are drag queens. There are not very many of them, but there are some. And they're doing it for entertainment purposes. It's not a way of life with them. It's the way that they earn a living or earn a part-time living by being a drag queen. Drag king, there's a large group of trans men who enter and perform as men in shows, just like a drag queen does, but they happen to be doing very masculine presentations and so forth. Cowboy skits, things like that. So I happen to have an acquaintance of mine who's in a committed relationship, and he transitioned in Florida years ago, lives in southern Ohio now, and has entertained all over the United States as a drag king. Cisgender, we talked about that. Got you with your pants down on that one. You didn't know that was coming. And it's simply the person who identifies the same as their birth assigned gender. That's all it means. M to F, male to female, transgender persons who birth assigned gender. Remember, I'm going to be saying birth assigned gender over and over again because birth assigned gender and how people feel about themselves often are two different things. Is male, but for many reasons lives or dresses as a female. And F to M, female to male, transgender persons whose birth assigned gender is female, but for many reasons lives or dresses as a male. I think those two terms are pretty self-explanatory. All right, this is the most difficult area to understand because this is more of a medical determination, a medical area, and as opposed to something that somebody decides for themselves. And I'll let you read that, and then we'll kind of go over that a little bit. I'm going to go down to the note portion, and I'll expand on that a little bit. My personal opinion, based on experience with friends and acquaintances, this should not occur. You should not alter children's physical being simply because you're trying to normalize them, because nobody knows exactly what's normal. I have met a number of intersex persons who were altered as youths, usually infants to about 3 years of age, and they're unhappy with that. They may have been made into a physical girl, but now in their teens and 20s or 30s, they know that they're not a girl. They know that they're truly a man or woman, or a man or a young man. And vice versa, there are a lot who were designated and made male, and they do not internally identify as being male. Once these decisions are made, it's very difficult to turn them around. In order for somebody who was raised as a girl at about age 11 or 12, they started on sex hormones or estrogen, progesterone, or something of that nature to normalize their body as a female child. I have a very old friend. I've known Jay for probably 15 or 20 years. And Jay was a child of parents who were in the Holocaust in Germany. They were Jewish. They lived through the Holocaust. And they ended up having children. Well, Jay was their last child. And at about age 12, started having extreme abdominal pains. Through physical exam, medical exam, it was determined that Jay had undescended testes. Now, this happens a lot more than people know. It's like 1 in 1,100 children born may have undescended testes if they have the male equivalent. The undescended testes were removed, and Judith was put on female hormones. And for most of Judith's life, she lived as a woman. At about age 43, 45, something of that nature, Judith came to the realization that she was not a woman, that she indeed is a man. And at that point began transitioning and had a double mastectomy and is now many years into living as a man and very, very happy. And it was a decision that should not have been made at a time when, that seemed to be the medical advice that was given at that time. That would have been about, I'd say mid-60s or something like that. Today, very, very few doctors and surgeons would perform that surgery. They do not believe that normalizing somebody's physical body to what they think it should be is not medically ethical. The reason is that they've guessed wrong about half the time. And so you've got a large group of people out there living lives that are not right for them. So, genderqueer. We mentioned earlier that this is very similar to the non-binary. And by relatively recent, I mean, well, I've been doing this presentation for over 20 years now. It was probably brought about the time I started doing this presentation. So for me, it's recent, but females in this category are often pejoratively referred to as butch. In other words, a young woman might express her gender identity in jeans and plaid shirts and heavy shoes and things of that nature. And that may or may not mean that she's genderqueer. It might just be a personal choice about clothing. And remember, most things to do with gender identity have everything to do with clothing. Very little of it has to do with neutral clothing. People who are challenging the gender norms do it in a way that they can be seen as challenging the gender norms. Michael, I mentioned him earlier. He wears heels all the time, except when he's working, because the job he has does not lend itself to being able to wear heels. He has to be in flat shoes of some kind in order to do his job. So just because someone, and who is Michael attracted to? Michael happens to be attracted to men. In fact, he's married to a man. I attended both of their weddings. One a number of years ago in the church. It was a church wedding, and this was before it was legal for same-sex persons to marry legally. Just last spring, last fall, they remarried again in a judge's chamber in Ohio, so now they're legally married. And many of their friends were bugging them to get legally married because there are a lot of legal protections in a legal marriage that there aren't in a non-legal marriage. So they're protecting each other, and we really had been bugging both of them for their own self-interest to get married. So they finally did it. So I've been to 2 weddings for the same couple. One, a very nice church wedding, and the other one, just a very simple civil ceremony. Living stealth. Usually a transsexual or transgenderist who passes so well that there may be no social or public perception that are not what they seem to be. Such a person sees no reason to inform those in the workplace or other non-very personal situations the fact of their birth assigned gender. As I said, if you know someone who fits this category, it's your obligation not to out them to other people. Now, on the other hand, if they say, I don't care, which is very, very seldom, I can assure you that almost never happens, but it does happen, then you're free to do that. But you need to respect the person, whether they're a close friend or an acquaintance. You need to respect their not wanting to be outed to the general public. It could cost them their job. It could cost them a relationship. It could cost them a lot of things that it's not your place to deprive them of a good life. Sexual orientation. This is a real sore point among a lot of people. Sexual orientation has absolutely nothing to do with gender identity. Some male to female transsexuals, transgenderists, cross-dressers are only attracted to women. Roughly 85% of them. About 10% are bisexual, and maybe 5% have a gay orientation. So it's nothing to do. Gender is between your ears. It's how you think and feel about yourself, not how your body expresses things. There's nothing about being gender contrary, gender queer, gender non-conforming, that makes you a homosexual. That has nothing whatever to do with it. You're heterosexual, say before you transitioned or whatever, and you may, from that standpoint, stay heterosexual, but if you transition from male to female and you still like women, what does that make you at that point? You're now a lesbian. You're not heterosexual anymore because you are a woman. And the same thing with a female to male. If you're female to male and you're attracted to women, you're in a heterosexual relationship. Change what? Oh, all right, sexual orientation. All right, thank you. Too many buttons. So if there are any questions about that, I'll be happy to entertain them later. All right, 85%. I mentioned that already. 85% of cross-dressing, transgender, or transsexual or transgenderist men are basically straight until they transition, and then they become a lesbian if they're attracted to women, and become heterosexual if they happen to be attracted to men. This is a tough one. And your sociology instructors will tell you that this is a low percentage. 93%, this has to do with pedophilia. There's an awful lot of assumptions made about people who are transgender, being pedophiles. All right, 93% of pedophiles are straight men. Actually, it's closer to 95, 96%, but I'm using 93 because I know if I say 93, nobody will accuse me of being wrong. The other areas of being pedophiles, you go down the list, you have straight men, And the next area of pedophilia occurs in straight women, and for a couple of reasons. In fact, there's just been 2 cases that just hit the news recently of teachers that were caught having sexual relationships with middle school and early high school students. Women teachers having sex with grade school or middle school and high school students. In fact, one of them even got pregnant by an 8th grade student. So that happens. Now that's the rarity. That does happen. Very few women are in that position because women naturally are not aggressive. That's not a woman's nature to be aggressive. So they don't usually do that. But there are other women in this group that do, and what they do is they recruit for their pedophile partner. They recruit for their male pedophile partner and help him because they're under his control, or they just love him so much, or a variety of reasons. But not because it's their own nature to do that, it's because they're trying to please their partner. The next area down, I remember after 93 or 95%, we're getting into really small numbers here, is a gay man. Are there gay men who are pedophiles? Sure. Are there very many of them? No. It almost never happens, but it does happen. And the next level down would be a lesbian. Now, these are FBI statistics, not mine. Very, 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 very few lesbian women are pedophiles. And the last category is transgender persons. And that's way down the list. And they've, in fact, in terms of restrooms, they have, instead of Texas, for example, where there's a lot of furor about restrooms, they've not had one single incident of a true transgender person in a restroom committing any kind of crime of voyeurism or anything of that nature. Not one in the state of Texas, in spite of what you hear from the legislature, in spite of what you hear in the news, it has not happened. 2 to 5%. Statistically, based on research that I've read, somewhere between 2 to 5% of people are transgender. That's probably an old statistic. And the reason I say that is because people your age are transitioning and expressing themselves in gender non-conforming ways at greater numbers than they did when I was out years and years ago. Very, very few people felt free enough. It was usually happened to persons in their 30s and 40s. Their children might have been raised for a variety of reasons. They felt that they could make that leap and go forward with the rest of their lives. 43%. That's from Ohio. I don't know what it is in Texas, but 43% of transgender persons attempt suicide in Ohio. 1.6% nationwide achieve it. That's my phone. I didn't put it on Do Not Disturb. Sorry about that. So 43%, think about that, because of lack of acceptance, because of lack of support, because of criticism from either their church or their family or whatever. They don't feel satisfied with their lives, so they attempt suicide. And it's a very, very grave problem. And darn if I can remember what .03 is.
I think that might be the actual percent of people who, of pedophilia that was committed by transgender people, if I remember correctly.
I don't think so, but okay. I'm going to let that one go. So those are just personal comments about the sister. And so if somebody, your friends or neighbors or something, or family tell you that, oh, gay people are out to be pedophiles, or transgender people are out to be pedophiles. And the reason they go in restrooms is so they can peek or they can assault people and so forth. You have information now, FBI information, that just isn't true. There's a lot of assumptions made, but it's not true. And I think that kind of speaks for itself. So at this point, I'm willing to accept questions. And Jenny's got something on her mind here. And you have a really beautiful green top on today.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, wonderful students. I just want to tell you a little bit more about our wonderful presenter, Antonia, who is a close friend of mine and to me has become family. I first met Antonia about 12 years ago. She was speaking at a social justice, peace advocacy conference here at South Texas College. The year after that, in 2012, was her first year ever presenting here for students.
11, you told me on the phone.
Yeah, it was 11. Oh, that's right. I met her 12 years ago, and so 11 years ago, she first started presenting here at STC. And was so kind and gracious and would usually do like 5 or 6 presentations every year for us. Literally thousands of students at South Texas College have heard her speak, and she's been so gracious and kind. She's presented at Fortune 500 companies. She's presented for counselor conferences, for education conferences, for businesses, for the criminal justice system, and she's recognized as an expert in a whole variety of places across the United States. I am so grateful for her kindness and generosity in all the time she's been presenting here. This is possibly her last presentation at South Texas College for a variety of different reasons. But so if we could please give her a big round of applause thanking her. One of the things I really enjoy is spending time with Antonia, and sometimes when we go shopping or when we go out to eat or when we're doing things,
Here we go.
ask, I know, I love these stories, but people often assume she's my mom, and I only wish my mother was this cool. Sorry, Mom. Anyway, but she's absolutely amazing. And yes, she is willing to answer questions from you. If you have a question, please come up to the microphone. This is being recorded so that other students in the future can have this important information as well. So if you have a question, please come up to the microphone and speak into the microphone so it can be recorded. You guys are awesome. And once again, let's thank Antonia for being here. In fact, come and line up, lovelies. Okay, I have a question for you that...
73.
Perfect. Quite a few students in the past, I don't know if as many people have this question now, but a question I've often heard from students is, well then what bathroom should transgender individuals go to? Oh my goodness, where should you be? Could you answer that?
Well, if we go by a lot of people in the Texas legislature, I should probably go hide behind a tree someplace in the woods. But that's not going to happen. A transgender person who expresses themselves in a particular gender role should use the restroom that corresponds with that gender expression. So in my case, I would be using the women's restroom. And I prefer to use the women's restroom for a variety of reasons. First of all, if I use the men's restroom, there's very, very high probability of my being assaulted and the victim of battery. Now, I hope you all know the difference between assault and battery, but you probably don't. Assault is verbal, battery is physical. So, very high likelihood of assault and a less but also high likelihood of battery. So that's why I do not want to use the men's restroom. It's just not safe to do so. If I'm in the women's restroom, what do I do in the women's restroom? I go in, I do what I have to do, and I get out of Dodge as quickly as I can. I have no reason to be there except to relieve myself, wash my hands, and get out. frequently I will not even adjust makeup in the women's restroom because I don't want to upset other people who may out me or see me in there as a transgender person and think things are not as they should be. So I try to make other people as comfortable as I can, although I don't think it should be necessary, but I do it anyway. So. And before you say anything, one thing I will say that often questions lead to more questions. So if something in a question piques your curiosity or makes you wonder about something that you were thinking about, don't hesitate to bring that up also. I'm sorry.
Good. What bathroom would or should a transgender person use?
We just did that. So, yeah. The bathroom that corresponds with their gender expression.
Why are people so concerned about what pronouns people use?
So concerned, Pronouns. Oh, pronouns. Oh. Well, I prefer female pronouns. She, her, that sort of thing. However, that's difficult for some people, especially for people who've known the person before they transitioned. So they'll make mistakes. My partner infrequently makes mistakes about my gender pronouns. But it does happen. Well, I know where her heart is, so I'm not going to get upset by it. And she'll do, ooh, ooh. And I have friends that'll go, ooh, ooh. So if it's done like that, but if somebody who blatantly is doing it on purpose, and we can tell when somebody's doing it on purpose, then that's hurtful. Because I'm presenting as a woman. I think I do a fairly good job of looking like a woman. I need to be about 4 inches shorter and about 80 pounds less, but other than that, I do a good job of presenting myself as a woman. Of course, I'd like to have a little bit of higher voice tenor, but I'm stuck with what I have. So, yes, if you're out and you're looking at pronouns, just try to use it. If you're confused about what pronoun to use, the easiest way to get around that is use the person's name. Gee, just think of that, how easy that would be. Rather than saying she or he or whatever, Antonia. Antonia said this, Antonia did that. We're going to the movie together, Antonia and I and Mark or Mary or whatever. So, it's not something that is not easy to circumvent. So if you're at all confused and you're worried about using the wrong pronoun, just use the person's name.
What should I do if a family member or friend comes out to me?
That microphone needs to be lower for these young people.
What should I do if a family member or friend comes out to me?
Well, first of all, accept them. In my case, the first thing that I would like to have is a hug. And be known that I'm still part of that family, of that friend's life, if it's a friend that I come out to. Express yourself in positive ways. I don't understand being transgender. I don't understand what's going on here. I will count on you to advise me and inform me. But in the meantime, I'm here to support and love you.
I heard many people...
A little louder. You're going to have to speak into the microphone.
I heard many people in the LGBTQ plus community are more likely to commit suicide or be attacked. Is that true?
I'm going to have a translation on that one.
I heard many people in the LGBTQ plus community are more likely to commit suicide or more likely to be in violent attacks. Is that true?
That is very true. As I mentioned in the on the slide, the previous slide, 43% of transgender persons in Ohio, that's where I have this statistic from, attempt suicide. And why? And I mentioned a little bit of that, but that's because of lack of acceptance. They might be, might have been raised in a very fundamental church, for example, and that's their transition, whether they're gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender, is not accepted by that church. And they make it very clear. You need therapy to get rid of that feeling. You need this or that. And that places that person in a feeling of not being loved and accepted. And that leads to the suicide and so forth and so on. As far as assault is concerned, to this day, there are still people who happen to be, let's say, two gay men coming out of a gay bar, and they walk down the street and they get past that safe zone, and they're assaulted by a car full of men because they happen to be gay. Not too long ago, we had a shooting in Florida where they raked the whole place and killed a number of people in a gay bar. So does it happen? Absolutely. And the other side of that is the law enforcement are not too sympathetic towards the LGBT community, and they don't try to stop these assaults as much as they should.
Could you mention Transgender Day of Remembrance?
Oh, in November we have, it's been recently, it's about 10 years old now, we have a Transgender Day of Remembrance. And every year we look at worldwide transgender deaths by assault, by battery and or direct murder. And I know for a fact, for the last 7 years, that worldwide figure is over 400 people. 400 people worldwide. United States stands average about 30 people in the United States every year that we know for sure were murdered because they're transgender. So.
Isn't this transgender stuff a new phenomenon? When did transgender stuff start?
Oh my goodness. How about, let's see, recorded history goes back 6,000 years pretty much now. We've got stuff from Egypt that goes back maybe 6,000 years as far as we know. Is that recent enough for you? Being transgender is nothing new. Seeing it and experiencing it is new. But it actually being there is not new.
Why would someone choose or want to be transgender?
Okay, that's a good question. Why, for example, would I choose to transition from male to female? Why would I do that? I do that because I have to. This is who I am. It isn't something, it's not like putting on a suit and a tie and becoming a banker. Okay? It's who I am. It's no different than you having brown hair. Okay? You might choose to bleach it and make it purple on one side and yellow on the other, or blue and yellow to support the Ukrainian people, but you still are going to have brown roots. So you're going to have brown hair no matter what. Just like you have brown hair, I am a transgender woman. Period. It's not a choice. It's who I am. I can choose to express it or not, but I cannot choose to be it. Okay?
I have a friend that is transgender. How can I best support him or her?
As I mentioned earlier, you tell them and show them that they are still important to you, that they still are in your life. If you say, oh, you're transgender, I don't want anything to do with you, then you're not supporting them. You're not giving them a space to be themselves. And you could be one of the reasons that they attempt or commit suicide. Not you by yourself, but all the aggregate of things that go on could contribute to that. You look like you're getting ready to go to a wedding. I like you.
Thank you. Okay, I have a question. What examples would you say, or what kind of discrimination do transgender people get? Or how do they get discriminated by other people?
You know, you're going to have...
Okay, it's okay. What kinds of discrimination do transgender people face? Discrimination.
Oh. Well, I mentioned church. That's a discrimination a transgender person can get usually very quickly. The church that I belong to actually was one of the first denominations to accept LGBTQ people in their services, and the first to have LGBTQ ministers. So that denomination is a very accepting one, but others are not. And I don't want to mention the names of the ones that I know are not, but it's because it's not fair to them. But if you're in a religion and they say you're a bad person because you happen to be gay, or you're a bad person because you happen to be transgender or lesbian or whatever it might be, they don't know who you are inside. Just because you have that expression or that feeling about yourself or that knowledge about yourself does not in itself make you a bad person. You might be a bad person, but being gay or lesbian or transgender is not the reason you're a bad person.
I have another one. Have you ever been discriminated?
That's a difficult question. Only mildly. And I'm probably among a very small minority of transgender persons. And my partner thinks it's because I have a strong presence. And because I have a strong presence, it makes people fear confronting me. And that's unusual. An awful lot of transgender persons walk around, let's say they're in the mall, they walk with their head down, and it looks as if they're up to something suspicious, and it puts a spotlight on them. When I'm in the mall, I walk in the mall and I carry myself just like I do here. And very few people are going to challenge somebody who's so strong in their appearance, so self-controlled and self-aware. If I look like a victim, then I'm going to be a victim.
Right. Have you ever been give me a second. Have you ever been confronted in the sense of like, oh?
I have been confronted mildly a couple of times, but it was done like I'm standing in line buying something, but it's never been a direct confrontation in my face. No, I personally have never experienced that.
Have you ever been assaulted?
Assault?
Yes, assaulted.
Assaulted is verbal.
Right.
So no.
No. Okay. If you don't mind sharing.
But I've never been a victim of battery either. Nobody's ever struck me.
Okay.
Okay.
If you don't mind sharing with us, or it's more on the personal side, what have you transgendered or have you changed within yourself? Yeah, like what have you changed, Antonia? Like, yeah, have you
All
had
right.
any like?
What did I say in my very first statement? This is not about me.
Right. Okay. I apologize. Those are my questions.
Yeah. This is not a presentation about Antonia. This is a presentation about transgender persons in general. My journey is not for publication.
I apologize.
No,
just one more
don't
question.
apologize.
From all of these years that you've been doing the presentations, are you like sad, or are you a little discomfort that you're going to be leaving this soon? Or like how you said, right, that this might be his or her last presentation.
Yeah, are you sad that this might be your last presentation with us?
Yes, in a way, but should I tell him? In June of this year, I'll be 80 years old.
Wow, you look young.
I think it's time.
Okay.
I think it's time I pass the baton to other people. So, yeah, I'm sad because I'm not going to carry on, but I have affected the lives of literally thousands of people all over the United States. And I have given my presentation, and they've altered it to a couple of young people, a couple of young men who are going to take this and move forward with it and try to make it a national presentation. So, yeah, I'm sad because it's something that I've done for a long time and I've enjoyed doing, but COVID kind of put a stop to it. In fact, I wear mostly casual clothes just like all the rest of you do. It took me about 20 minutes to find an outfit that hadn't shrunk in my closet. It's amazing how you put things away in the closet and you come back to wear them and they've shrunk. and I blame that kind of on COVID too, because of inactivity and things of that nature. So it did take me a while to find an outfit that I felt represented who I am and how I wanted to see you. Myself, I was at Port Aransas to the Whooping Crane Festival a couple of weeks ago, and while I was up there, I was wearing either jeans or tights the whole time I was there. So that's how I dressed most of the time, but I can't come here and do a professional presentation in jeans and tights.
Right.
You wouldn't believe me if I did.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Take your mask down, please.
Yeah. You don't look 80. Okay, you don't look 80. Do you know of any organizations in the Rio Grande Valley to help
Yes,
or support?
there are, and you can look them up on the internet. Just do RGV, transgender support, things of that nature, and there's two fairly active here. There were two PFLAG, Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. That's a national organization. There were two chapters down here, both of which have kind of faded away. But other than that, there are two transgender support groups. One's fairly centered in the Harlingen area, and the other one's in the McAllen area. So, and they're both doing a lot of work, looking for help when they do an event or they do something of that nature. They're very strong there. They're also, those same organizations are very supportive of the LGB community in addition to transgender, because although we're not the same, we're married together because of the same type of discrimination and problems that we face in society.
Okay, one more question. What do you recommend for people who can't get to McAllen or Harlingen?
Internet. There's a lot of help on the internet these days. When I first started looking for people like myself, I can tell you a story about myself. I knew that there was something going on with me that was different. I knew that I liked to dress in women's clothes. I knew I liked to do that sort of thing. But this was I told you I'm going to be 80 in June, okay. Fortunately, I had a job that allowed me to travel. And when I'd get to a new town and I'd have evening hours free, I would go to the library and try to find out things about cross-dressing, transgender, transitioning and things of that nature. And after about the third or fourth library, I'm talking about Chicago, Cincinnati, Dayton, all over the Midwest, even Detroit, I'd go to these huge libraries. I kept finding the same textbooks over and over and over again. No new information, no information of where you could go to find like people. And I did end up finally finding the Crossport group and this is by the time we got to the internet. I found them on the internet. And Crossport is a Cincinnati transgender support group. Cross originally was designed for cross-dresser support. But very, very quickly, you getting low on time? Okay. Very quickly, they learned that they had to support the entire transgender community. And I have been a member and a board member and also an outreach person. I did a radio show once a month for about 4 years and was very involved with the leadership of Crossport. And they're still around. They were formed in 1986, and they were among the first transgender support groups in the United States. Now, some of the early ones, back into the 50s, were primarily for cross-dressers. And how they got together, if you found out about it, you'd show up, and you had to at least put on stockings while you were there, or you were not allowed to stay. And that particular organization would not admit somebody who was a transsexual, only cross-dressers. Because the fear was that if they accepted transsexuals, that the spouses and partners of these cross-dressers would fear that their partner were going to be attracted to and want to create a relationship with a transsexual. All that specious, it didn't happen, but that's what they thought. And that was the rule for them all the way up until the late 90s. That didn't change until almost 2000. So there's been help around, but it's been very clandestine, kind of hidden, and very difficult to find. Early on, there were some magazines, but you had to know where to find them and how to subscribe to them because they weren't in the magazine rack at your local supermarket, but they were there. And that's the way a lot of people made contacts for a long time. But our group, Crossport, in Cincinnati, has been around since '86. And as I said, we are among the oldest inclusive transgender support groups. By inclusive, I mean accepting transgenderists, transsexuals, genderqueer, anybody who is in that thing. And the only requirement is there's no, quote, membership fee or anything like that. The only requirement is that you be supportive of the transgender community. You don't even have to be transgender, just supportive of it. And you can find them on the internet. Just, do a Google search for Crossport, and you'll find them. Now, I haven't been involved with the leadership since about 2007 or 8, something like that. But for 4 years, I did the radio show, and I did outreach, and I met with people in the LGBTQ community to plan events and, do things so we weren't, say a gay group was planning something on July 10th, and we were working so that we didn't have an opposing event on the July 10th. That kind of a thing. So we had a coalition meeting about that sort of thing. So.
I have 2 questions for you. First of all, can you speak a little bit about how long do most people know that they're transgender, or is it just something that you kind of decided when you were in your 30s or 40s, or,
Okay, that's a pretty individual thing. There are a lot of young people a lot of people know from the time they're about 3 or 4 years old that they're, okay, a young lady, girl, 3, 4, 5 years old, just totally resists wearing dresses and things of that nature and wants to wear jeans and T-shirts like her brother, her older brother. Now, she doesn't have a word for it at that point, but she's a transgender person and will be moving into that as she matures. Now, there's some fit that same description, but as they get older, they say, oh, no, that's not who I am. That's just who I was when I was 4. And they grow out of that feeling, but some don't. So it's an individual thing. You can't, so you don't want to fight with someone who's young and say, oh no, you're full of hooey. You know, you're not who you think you are. And you need to support them. Now, do I think a child should have medical intervention? I don't think it should happen for intersex children. Do I think it should happen for children who happen to think that they're transgender? No, not medical intervention. Social work, psychology, things of that nature, absolutely. Counseling, absolutely. Medical intervention, absolutely not. And later on, some people, I happen to know one person in their 40s started to attending crossport meetings as a cross-dresser. 5 years later, went to Thailand and transitioned to a woman. So it was something that came on them as they matured into life and knew that they were in the wrong gender. But it didn't happen when they were 5, it happened as they matured. So there's no set answer. To answer your question is no, there's nothing. I can't say, oh, all people who are hit 45 are going to begin transitioning, or all people who are 11 are going to know for the rest of their life that they're transgender. Doesn't work that way.
I was just wondering, to be a cross-dresser, I'm setting you up here, to be a cross-dresser, would somebody have to look like you to be identified as a cross-dresser, or would somebody, like, I look around the room and when I walk across campus, I don't know that I see anybody who's transgender or a cross-dresser or whatever else.
Well, I would think that in our society today, most cross-dressers on campus would not look like me. They would be wearing the jeans and the tights and that I mentioned when I was up at Port Aransas. They're going to fit into what the norm today is for most. If they're male to female, they're going to fit into what the idea is. Hello. The idea is of what women on the street look like. I have, again, almost 80. My idea of how a woman should dress is, the best way I can put it is executive secretary. In suits, things of that nature. Look like you belong in the boardroom helping the president get his job done, or in the boardroom doing that job. That's my idea of what I think proper attire for business is. And that's what I try to convey when I do my presentations. I want to look like I'm here to do business.
And if I can add to that, we have about 30,000 STC students. Just statistically speaking, that means there's got to be at least 3,000 STC students that would fit in the transgender umbrella. Here at this campus, we usually have about 3,000 to 5,000, which means that we should have probably 300 to maybe even as many as 500, 700 students that are transgender in some way or another.
Or gender nonconforming, or non-binary, or a lot of other fits. Again, it's a big umbrella.
So you might not always recognize, but we are surrounded by people who fit under the transgender umbrella. And if you've got a question, come on down.
If that's it. Uh-oh. I'm not off the hook. I'm not off the hook yet.
Not yet, but. Oh, you can go. It's okay. You have a question. Oh, wait. It's okay. All right. So this is a more recent, I guess you could say, and particular to Texas kind of question. In Texas, there are a lot of laws being debated and efforts being made to punish people who are transgender. Specifically, the more recent issue with parents being considered abusive if they are giving gender-affirming care to their children. What can we do about this, and what are your opinions on it?
What can you do about it? If you feel that you need to support the transgender community, there's only one thing you can do about it, and that's vote. Now, I know a lot of young people say, my one vote won't mean a thing. But if your one vote, and your one vote, and your one vote, and your one vote, and your one vote are aggregates of a vote, then it means something. But if you stay home and don't express your vote, then you're dead. Anything you want to do to help is non-existent, because you've closed the door on putting people in office that can help or can be empathetic to the LGBTQ community. And in my personal opinion, again, I said children should not be medically treated. Small children, preteens especially. But that does not mean that they should be ignored. They still need social work, they still need counseling, and they still need psychological help. So,
I am so sorry. We definitely want to hear your question, Miha, but I know there's a bunch of people who need to leave because class time is up. If you want to come up and ask your question, if you need to leave, if you can wait for this one last question, that would be most helpful. If you need to leave, I'm going to sit the handouts over here on this corner. Please be very quiet.
Hi.
How can you tell, because you said that kids around 4 or 5 years old can tell when they're going to transition and stuff like that, right? So how
Well, they wouldn't do a transition. They want to, it's more of an
thinking
expression
about it.
at that point. Okay.
Mhm. So how can you tell if it's, like for girls, how can you tell if it's not just a tomboy phase? Because I know
Well, you
when I
don't
was
know.
younger, I had a tomboy phase, so I'm
You
like,
don't
how
know.
can you know?
That's my point. You support them. You don't criticize them.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be, as you just said, tomboy behavior. But it might be a full gender expression situation where they really feel they're in the wrong body. So that's why you don't do the medical interventions, but you do the psychological and the social work help to help them through that situation. Yeah, there are thousands of young women who were tomboys that never became transgender. Okay? One doesn't necessarily lead to the other, but it does in some cases. And you don't want to traumatize that young person if that is the case, so that they don't feel that they can express themselves. And there have been some young people under 10 who've committed suicide because they weren't being supported. It's not at all that. A lot of young gay men, preteens, commit suicide because they're not accepted where they are. They're not accepted by their peers, by their church, by their parents, and their only way out, that they feel their only way out, is suicide. So we don't want to do things that lead to that, but at the same time, we don't want to do harm to somebody that, that, as you say, may just be a tomboy and, grow up differently. Okay? I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Again, thank you to everyone for coming here for this presentation. Let's give Antonia a round of applause and thank you. Antonia has always been incredibly generous with her time. If any of you would like to speak with her more in depth or ask some personalized questions, she's willing to stay here for 10, 15 minutes. Please get a handout. It kind of summarizes a lot of the main points of the presentation. And again, thank you. Please spread the word with your friends. We're going to be making this recording available for others. Thank you so much.